We've been going through the book of James. If you remember, we're nearing the end. If you remember, we're going through this review. That, remember, chapter 1 was turning trials into triumphs. And then we had the handling temptation. And also quit kidding or deceiving yourselves, that we need to be a doer of the word, not just a hearer. And then you have the partiality, which we all can get involved with the partiality aspects. You had genuine faith, not just dead faith, or just words or emotions, but dynamic faith. And then you had the world's smallest yet largest troublemaker, one that you can never tame, but you can control. The sign of maturity is that of your tongue. You also have true wisdom. And today I think we would definitely agree that what one person calls wisdom is not what the Bible calls wisdom. You then had Christian conflicts, and if you remember, we had that, and it's a lot of it. We have conflict with each other, we have conflict with God, we have conflict with ourselves. We address it by being submitting to Him, drawing near to Him, and then also humbling ourselves. And then we had, remember, talking about planning for the future, playing God. How many times do we play God in other people's lives and in our own lives? They need to do this, they need to do that. We can all tell people how to do stuff. Play God. Then last week, or 2 weeks ago, you remember we saw Money Matters, which you remember the warning to the rich, and the way they got their money, the way they used their money. Nothing wrong with the money, but how are we getting it, and what do we do when we get it? Are we using it for Him or just for ourselves? And then obviously last week when Bill spoke, he gave you that challenge to show your faith by the, you lost 1 week already. You got 5 weeks left now, so we're going to be asking, come the 31st, we'll be asking if anybody had the privilege of sharing their faith. So I think it's interesting when you look at what he's getting ready to. Remember, you just got to be talking about people who have been wronged. And it reminds me of at work, they don't work there anymore, but I worked with 2 guys for 20 years at the refinery, and they had been wronged at different times. And it's interesting that they've been wronged. One of them gave me a great detailed plan of how he was going to get even. It happened 20-some years earlier, but boy, he was plotting his revenge. The other one was a mechanic, and the way he got his revenge, and it became very well known that if you messed with him, when your vehicle went in for repair, it took a long time for that. Every vehicle got put in front of yours to where it was amazing, nobody messed with him. Because they wanted their vehicle back, therefore they left him alone. So he had it, and he was, very well known. But it's interesting when you look at it in the book. If you remember, you had the believers. You had it in chapter 2. You have it in chapter 4. You had it in chapter 5. What do we do when we are treated incorrectly? And so I think it's interesting what you have. You're doing right when you've been wrong. How many times do we find that difficult? Doing right when you've been done wrong. He tells you 4 things, 4 commandments that are in this passage, from chapter 5, verse 7 through chapter 5, verse 12. And so you can see the setting. Notice first command, and he's writing to brethren. You see that in verse 7, in verse 9, verse 10, and verse 12. So he's writing to believers each time, brethren. So notice the first commandment, what to do right when you've been wronged, is to be patient. How many of you find that very easy to do? It's interesting, the word here for patient is actually 2 words together. And it has to do with basically long suffering. Or how would we put it? They have a long fuse. Gene and I had a student, and then he later worked with Dad and I, one of the shortest fuses of any person I've ever known. I mean, and people, he played soccer, and people loved to just get his goat. He amazing how many yellow cards and how many red cards he got playing soccer. You could get under his skin just so easily, and people would do it. Very, very short fuse. To his credit, he would come back and apologize afterward, but it's still, it's amazing how many times he had to come and apologize for losing his cool, whether it be at work or in the classroom or on the playing field, whatever. But notice then, he's writing to brethren, and he's telling us to have a long fuse. And it's interesting, the way you stop and you do that, you think about it. In 1 Corinthians 13 and verse 1, it says, love is... Okay, so if we're wanting patience, it's going to come from the Holy Spirit using love, seeing another person's point of view, walking in their shoes, so on. So if we want patience, it's going to come from the Holy Spirit and an outpouring of love. How many of you find it a lot more easy to put up with a crying kid in a restaurant if it happens to be your grandson or your nephew or whatever? How many of you are a lot more easy to that kid or that parent versus when it's a total stranger? Why is that? Because you love them. Okay, so notice he tells us then to be patient. And it's interesting what you have here, and I think you can look at it. Notice it says, how long should you be patient? Until the coming of the Lord. Okay? Until the coming of the Lord. Okay, when you think about it, the coming of the Lord, okay? Could you and I meet him today? Or it could be later. So I need to be patient. Most of us want to be patient, but we have a time frame. Not until the coming Lord. When I go meet him at my death or whether it be the rapture or until he comes back. But notice, I'm supposed to be patient that long. And I think it's interesting when you look at it. Why it should be? Because his coming is near. When you think about it, where do we go when he comes? We go to the judgment seat of Christ. So how many of us want to be right in the middle of really making a total fool out of ourselves when Christ comes back? You know? It's kind of humorous. Richard told on himself when he charged the net on that first time he said he had ever played this pickleball, his knee gave out right when he got to the net. And he goes to a real large, prominent Southern Baptist church, and he said there were 75 church members that are all over this place. And some words came out, not swear words, but words came out that he was very embarrassed. And he said, right when they were coming out, I kept saying to myself, be quiet, be quiet. But obviously, knowing, he knew right away what he had done, or at least part of it. But how many times do you and I, can we say things that we know, even in the middle of it? Wish he went to church this last Sunday, and what do you think the pastor spoke on? Words and how to control what words are right and wrong to say. You know, he was laughing about it, had good nature about it, so I thought, well, he and Judy were kind of jabbing each other while they were doing it. Well, think about it. When we talk about the coming is near, if you want an illustration, what about an elementary school teacher? How many times does this happen to you? The elementary school teacher steps out in the hallway, and what happens with you as kids?
They all start shouting.
Okay, did you know when she was coming back, or he was coming back? And what happens when they came back and you were a little bit rowdy or whatever? Okay, that's like it is here. You don't know when Christ is coming back. So we need to be patient when Christ is coming. We don't know when. I think it's interesting. Notice then it gives you an illustration of how we need to be like. Notice he says, behold, the farmer waits for the precious product of the soil, being patient about it until it gets the early and late rains. Okay, if you, in Israel, they had two rains, or do have, you have it, you know, in your October, November, and then again in April, and so on. So you would plant just before the first rains, and then you would have to wait until the later. Okay, now does the farmer just sit and plant and just sit there and do nothing for the next, 5 months or whatever? No. Okay, they're out there weeding, they're out there doing all kinds of things they need to be doing. So you and I need to be planting, which, by the way, all of us are planting. It's just, what are we planting? Are we planting Luke 8, using the Word of God, planting it in our lives and in other lives? Or are we planting seeds that are not good? And consequently, we'll be producing things that are not good. So we are a farmer. We need to wait patiently. We put it in the ground, and we wait for it. That's the trusting of the Lord. When I was really young, my dad farmed and took care of my grandmother's place and stuff. And it's amazing. I went one summer, I was second, third grade, we went and I was gonna make this big money, so we went to help my grandfather, and we went to weed, going up and down bean fields. And, you know, I got just enough money to pay for my bus ticket back, and I was able to buy some clothes. But it's amazing how hard that work is. There's something always to be done. Always to be done. And you had no trouble sleeping when you got home at night either. Notice, I think it's interesting, the cultivating, but notice, what does God do? Does God bring the water? You and I don't. Does God bring the sunlight? There's things that that we have to allow Him to do. We have to patiently do our part, but we have to allow God to do His. And that's the hard part. How many of us want to do our part, His part, and everybody else's part? I think it's interesting. So the thing you can ask yourself is, am I planting, cultivating the proper seed? Am I patiently waiting on God to do His part? And it reminds me, this past couple of weeks ago, Willis moved into the house, he and Casey, and when before they moved in, the people were putting in doors and stuff, and they messed up some of the sheetrock. Well, you know, he'd put down some marks, and they were supposed to fix it, and of course they didn't. So there's always a phone call, and you know who gets called. You know. So I go over there, and it's walls like you have here, and they mess the texturing and stuff up. Well, I've done it before, but the problem is, how many of you spray the stuff on it to make it to match it, but then if it's not perfect, what's the tendency to do? Start messing with it. And if you leave it alone, it'll do just fine. But when you start messing with it, you got to start all over, or you got to patch up the thing you messed. How many times are we having to patch and redo something because we messed it up? It wasn't God that messed it up, we did. Or God has to come in. So think about being patient. Notice the second thing in verse 8. It says, you be patient, strengthen your hearts. And it has to do, the strengthening your hearts has to do with propping up something that's overly heavy. It's too heavy to do it on your own. You ever got where your heart's just really heavy, you got too much on your plate, you just can't do it. It's just too much. And you think about it, if they're going through this persecution and doing different things that's taking place, that could easily happen. It's more than you can bear. Strengthen your heart. Then how do you do that? And two things. Notice in 1 Peter 5 and verse 7 it says, cast your cares where? Because He cares for you. You go to Him in Hebrews 4 to receive grace and mercy. But how many of us don't go to Him until it's really bad? The other thing you have in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 2, it makes this statement, bear one another's burdens and thus fulfill the law of Christ. The word there for bear one another's burdens is an excessive burden. So in other words, we each need to carry our own load, but there comes times when that load is too great for somebody to carry. Then you and I as believers, the law of Christ would be what? If we love each other as Christ loved us, then we need to help them. We see a burden that they cannot carry, we need to go and help them. So when we are strengthening, we're looking around. How many of us can see people who are just really overwrought? And how many of us, our answer is, I'll pray for you, and you leave and you don't help. When you see something you can do, then you need to go help. But that's going to also cost you something. And so you have it, and it's important. It can be for to do it. So notice, one, you have to be patient. Two is strengthen. I think it's also interesting as a demonstration. How can you do that? There's a couple of principles that are out. How many of you ever heard of the 50-20 principle? How many of you ever heard of the 4-8 principle? By the way, it's a fabulous book. I challenge you to get it. The 4-8 principle. What is it? All right? Two passages. The 50-20 principle is out of Genesis. One of you men have that one? Genesis 50 and verse 20.
50-20?
Yeah.
I got that.
Go for it.
Joseph. And as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive.
Joseph, he didn't know what he was going through, but because God used him, which by the way, that was all preparation. At that young age, what would be the chances of him learning in order how to delegate and do all the administrative parts? He was faithful, not understanding why, but God meant it for good. He then was able to strengthen others because of what he'd been through. So the 50-20 principle is really important. The 4-8 would be out of Philippians. Go ahead.
Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is good, is of good repute, if there is any excellence and anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things.
Okay, what do we dwell our minds on so much?
Student stuff.
Okay, it's a choice. You think about, where was Paul when he wrote that?
Prison.
A nice, pristine place. Okay? We have control of our mind. We choose where to take it and what to think about. And that 4-8 principle is so important. And I think, so much of, you think about it with Mordecai and Naaman and so on. Well, what is he thinking about? He's thinking about the one thing, the one person who's not bowing down to him. And we often get in that same type of mentality. So think about it. Remember, we're told to be patient and strengthening your heart. So who do you know who's under an excessive burden? And how can you help them? Who is under excessive burden and you can help? So when I was talking to Richard, he mows his own yard. He uses his little electric lawnmower and he's out there mowing his yard. So I asked him, I said, okay, who's mowing your yard? He said, Judy's doing it. Okay. His wife's mowing it, that's fine. Who's weed eating? Nobody. Well, he's not going to be walking for a year. So if they don't find somebody to weed eat it, and he keeps an immaculate yard. Okay? So what should you do? All right?
Pray for him.
Right. And that's what we usually do in it. Okay? I said, well, I can stop by when I'm going from one yard to another. He said, well, you're super busy. I said, well, if you need it, it's not a problem. I can stop by. But it's going to cost you something. But if you say you're a friend and you're under excessive burden and he's always kept a beautiful place, and it's not that big a yard, it wouldn't take that long, what are you going to do? So you need to be patient, but you need to strengthen. Notice the next thing you're told to do, probably the hardest one. Don't complain. The word there for complain is actually don't carry a grudge. Now, how many times as believers do we carry a grudge? I'll forgive you, but I'll never forget you. And you'll never want anything to do with people or you change. I think it's important when you think about it. And notice it also says against one another. He's writing to believers. How many believers have trouble with other believers? Because of what was said? Why do we have so many churches? Most of it is not doctrine. Most of it is because people can't get along. And I think that's what happens so often. You have the different ones that you have. So notice then, don't complain. And notice the duration. That you yourselves may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing right at the door. Okay? The deterrent. Who's standing there?
Jesus.
Who's going to judge them? Jesus. And who's going to judge you? And how many of us want to take his place, and we want to be the judge? It's important to recognize he's the judge, not only of them, but of me. And I think it's important to recognize the judge part that you have. I think it's interesting. Notice the demonstration you now have. I think it's interesting what he says in verse 10. As an example, brethren, of suffering and patience, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Did the prophets have any difficulty? I mean, you look at it, even when he called like Jeremiah, they're not going to believe you, they're going to oppose you, they're going to do all this stuff, but I want you to do it anyway. Boy, that sounds like a great job. Nobody's going to listen. They're all going to oppose you. And by the way, did he go through so many difficult times? I mean, it was terrible. Isaiah is another one. Did Daniel have any problems? Ezekiel. I mean, all of them had tremendous problems. You think about it with Paul, which obviously was later, but what about him in 2 Corinthians? I'll just read it to you. You tell me if this sounds like any type of what you have. 5 times I received the Jewish 39 lashes. Now, 1 would be bad enough. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Now, who beat with rods? Romans. So think about it. By the way, we only know of a couple of those. The rest of those he didn't even write about. How many, if you and I were writing letters to other believers and we were being beaten, how many of us would write about all that stuff? Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. We only know about 1. Night and day in the deep I've been in frequent journeys, dangers of rivers, dangers of robbers, dangers from my countrymen, dangers from Gentiles, dangers from cities, dangers of wilderness, dangers of the sea, dangers among false brethren. I've been in labor and hardship through many sleepless nights and hunger, thirst, often without food and cold and exposure. Apart from such external things, there are daily pressures from within concerning the churches. I think he'd been through a couple things, don't you? But was he patient? Was he steadfast? Did he do it without grumbling? I think it's important for us to recognize they were patient. But I think what's important in a minute, you're going to another example, and we miss, I think, me included, how we did categorize this individual. But notice, I think it's interesting, in 2 Timothy 3:12, it says, all who desire to live godly in Christ will be what? Persecuted. Don't think it's unusual. If you're living for the Lord, you will experience persecution. Now, that could come from Satan. It could come from other believers. I've had it at work too. What happens when you're doing a really good job and other people are standing around all the time? What do you think they do to you? They corner you and tell you what, Brian? Slow down. You're making us look bad. Don't do that. Well, I'm on the clock. I'm getting paid. That's what I'm supposed to do. And you can do it. So notice that we had 3 so far. Command to be patient. Command to strengthen your hearts. Command not to carry a grudge. Notice then he gives you the next example, Job. Now, how many times have we heard the patience of Job? That's not what this text tells us. Was he impatient? Did he get upset with God? Did he question him? What does he do? And what word is used? Notice what it says. And you get down to verse 12. Behold, we count those who blessed with what? Endured. You have heard of the endurance of Job. Job persevered. He never cursed God. He did all the rest. We have the patience of the prophets and the waiting. He had the perseverance of Job. We need to persevere. Because with Job, it worked out in the end. But Job didn't know it when he was going through it. It's interesting also when you think about when Job, if you remember in 23:10, remember it says that I'm going to come forth as gold. To come forth as gold, what does that mean? God takes away all the other things, the impurities. He's taken it away. In 2 Peter, it's also actually 1 Peter, it says that when you go through persecutions that you may find favor with the Lord. How many of us think when we're going through things, you're finding favor with the Lord? How we respond, you can find favor with the Lord. So if you're thinking about it, when you look at it, God glorified, Job was purified. Now, how many of us want God glorified? 1, okay. How many want us to be purified? Now, I think it's interesting. A lot of us don't want to be purified because that means He's having to put us under fire, and it has to, you go through it. We want things we buy purified, and we want others purified, but we don't want to be. So notice then, when He's going through these things, we are to be patient. We're to strengthen each other and ourselves. We're then not to complain. And then the last one, you notice it's interesting. I think it's interesting when you look at it. It says, don't swear. And they find that in verse 12. And notice what it says. But above all, my brethren, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so you may not fall under judgment. coming out of it, obviously the Sermon on the Mount, and what they would do is they would swear by different things. And if they didn't swear by it, then they could then maybe tell a little white lie. And he's trying to tell you what. Remember, he's dealing with character here, is he not? How many people can have character, but then when they open their mouth, they lose it all? They could then, maybe they're patient, maybe they persevere, maybe they don't carry a grudge, and then they open their mouth and tell all these white lies, quote unquote white lies, and they stretch things. Our yes should be yes, and our no should be no, to stay true to our character. And I think it's interesting when you look at it, the character disclosure might be a way of putting it, but so you look at it, we shouldn't be patient, we should be patient, we should strengthen your hearts, we should not carry a grudge, and we shouldn't swear. Be a person of your word. One of the nicest compliments I got this week, I've got a call from a guy at work, he wanted me to go out and do their gauge. They were doing a lot of underground digging, putting in new lines. And when you're that close to the river, they want to know where the groundwater is. Underground groundwater, because when water's coming into a hole, hey, do we have a leak? What's going on? So I go and I gauge, and I knew it was low, and it was not even 5 feet. You go down 5 feet, and it's nothing but water nonstop. So when you're trying to put a pipe in the ground, and you're standing in there with equipment, different things, they want to know that. And he made the statement or whatever. He said something to me or whatever, and I said, well, you know what it was. And he said, well, I know with you, there's no lie. You're going to tell me the truth. You're not going to lie to me. And I thought, well, I told him, I said, well, I won't lie intentionally. I could tell you something and be wrong, but it will not be intentional. And I think that's the best thing you can do, is tell somebody the truth. Whether they want to hear it or not, tell them the truth. And it's happened at different times when they've had product coming in wells or doing whatever. They realize, hey, you're below the water table. You're never going to suck the water out of that hole, because as fast as you suck it out, it's coming right back in. You need to know. So let's think about how we can apply this today. We're finishing a little early on purpose because we have a business meeting. But think about this. How would others describe my attitude and actions when I'm wrongly treated? Is God glorified? Am I being purified? And what I want you to think about in 2 Corinthians 1, verse 3 and 4, let me just give this to you, because I think sometimes while we go through things, think about this. God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our afflictions, so that we might be able to comfort those who are afflicted with the comfort we receive ourselves. You mean God might have me go through something just so that I can help somebody down the road? Aren't we supposed to be His ambassador? So you wonder why. It may have nothing to do with you. It may have strictly to do with somebody you can help down the road. Why did Joseph go through what he went through? To help out and preserve a nation. What about, am I patiently waiting on God to develop the seed, to produce the product, perform the judgment, or do I like to jump in the middle of the process? Who do I know who's under an excessive burden? And what am I doing to help alleviate that? Do I comfort others with the comfort I receive? We've gotten comfort, but how many of us aren't too good about giving it to somebody else? Am I a man or a woman of my word? And how many of us are living by the 50-20 principle or the 4-8 principle? Where is our mind? And do I recognize God can be using me in somebody else's life?